Alright, hello everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm a junior grooming artist currently working in the film industry. And today I want to start my course, my Houdini Grooming course. And this is going to be part 0, kind of a prerequisite about the basic setup that I'm going to show you. And yeah, let's jump right in. So this is going to be a course structure with multiple parts, where I'm also going to be providing homework that you guys are free to follow in case you want to. I recommend it if you're here to learn. And we're going to be mostly talking about broad concepts, and this is not really going to be a step-by-step tutorial for one specific groom. It's mostly going to be about how to problem solve and think through grooming. So if you're interested in that, then stick around for future parts. I would recommend to first watch the entirety of the video and then follow the steps afterwards, just so you don't miss anything, and I might jump around a little bit because I'm not scripting this. Perfect. So we're going to be talking about the completely basic setup. It's not going to be a lot of work to copy because it's going to be super basic, but I need you guys to understand the workflow that I'm going to show you, which is my workflow. I'm not claiming that this is the best workflow in any way. It's just the way that I like to work, and I will also be explaining why I like to work this way. Enough theory, let's jump right in. So if we do want to work in Houdini with a groom, the first thing we always need to do is import our geometry that we're going to be working on. For this example, I'm just going to be working with a basic sphere, so let's set that up. The way we're going to be doing that is we're going to drop a geometry context, and I like to call it import geo, and let's jump right in. So some of you might want to work on a custom model, which you could do by just dropping a file node and going to whatever path your model is located at. And like I said, we're not going to be doing that. So I'm just going to drop a sphere, not this kind. Let's do a polygon mesh, or actually let's do a polygon. Now, in case you do want to import a custom model, there are some pitfalls that you might run into. So let's cover those. I'm going to demonstrate them on this sphere. If you hover over your node and hit this I tab, which is an informations tab, we can see that we currently have 42 points, 80 primitives, 240 vertices, and just a P attribute. I'm going to quickly drop 2 nodes here, which are the pack node and the poly soup. Don't worry about these 2 nodes. This is just for visualization, because when you import a model like an Alembic or an FBX model, you might be hovering over the node and hitting the informations tab, and it might look like this, where you see 1 point, 1 primitive, 1 vertice, and 1 pack geometry. In this case, you will not be able to work with this mesh. We first need to do some adjustments to it to get access to all the information. In this case, we would need to drop an unpack node. If we look at this node, we can see it has 42 points now. It still shows 1 primitive. For you, depending on what model you import, it might already show the correct number of primitives, but if it shows 1 primitive, then what we need to do is we also need to drop a convert node to convert this polygon soup, which is a way that Houdini stores mesh information. We need to drop a convert node, and then we'll see we have the entire information of this mesh accessible to us. You can drop these 2 nodes after every import. Even if your model comes like this sphere, completely unpacked, these 2 nodes don't have a downside. So I'm just going to leave them here just for clarity reasons, but be sure to check if your model is packed and or poly-souped, and then drop the nodes accordingly. What we're also going to be doing is dropping a null node at the end here, which is going to be our out geo. And if we visualize it, hop out, that's going to be the import of our mesh done. I like to turn the visibility of this context off, just because we're not really going to be looking at that anyways. We're going to be using the skin, and we're going to be looking at the skin, but since this is just us importing the mesh, we don't need to look at it. One thing that I forgot to mention, because we are just working with a sphere, if you happen to have other geometry, which I'm just going to duplicate this sphere real quick, and let's also move it to the side and drop a merge node. Let's say our model looks like this, and we only want to groom on 1 sphere. What we would also do in this geo import context is drop a blast node, and then either select whatever you want to blast, or you select what you want to keep, and then hit the delete non-selected button. That way we isolate the geometry that we're going to be grooming on. I'm just going to leave it like this, just because, actually for clarity reasons, I'm just going to remove this and leave it as one sphere. Okay, now we're done with the import of our geometry. Next up, let's actually start with the 3 steps that are going to be crucial to our grooming process. And I like to keep things clean, so I will drop a subnetwork and call this groom. It just keeps things separate, like this is where we prep our geometry, and this is where we're going to do all our grooming work. So when we jump in, we just see these 4 inputs that we can completely ignore, and we can drop another geometry node here, and we can name this skin. This is where we're going to be importing our skin, so let's do that. When we jump in, we see nothing. Perfect. So we're going to need to object merge our geometry in here, which we can do by dropping an object merge node, and then choosing the output node that we made in the other context. Now we can see we have our geometry back, and it's also clean, and if we look at the info tab, we have all the info, so this is perfect to work with. We're not going to be doing too much in this context at the moment, so let's already drop our output with a null, name this out skin, and we're going to come back here and do some adjustments, but because this is very beginner stuff, I just want to leave it like this. One thing that I will add real quick is something that is called a VDB. I just want you guys to hear about. We're going to talk about it more in future episodes, but for now, we should probably cover how to create a VDB and also what is a VDB. So for those of you who don't know, a VDB is pretty much a volumetric representation of our mesh, which just means that it allows Houdini to know where the inside of our mesh is and where the outside of our mesh is. Let's create it, and then it'll be easier to see. We can create it with a simple node called VDB from polygons. I like to put it to the side here because we're not going to direct it to our skin output. We're going to make a separate output. So when we drop this node and connect our input to it and visualize it, we can see kind of a pixelated version of our mesh, which is a volumetric representation of it. We can make this a more accurate representation by decreasing the voxel size, which makes the volume denser. And please be careful with this number. We do not want to overshoot it. I like to 0.01 is a good number for me. That way it still runs smoothly and we have a decently accurate representation. We can also create another null here and name this one out VDB. Since we're kind of covering general pitfalls that you might run into, there is one thing to... Honestly, there is just one issue that sometimes happens with the VDB that I'm going to simulate with a clip node. So if we cut our sphere in half, meaning that it now has an open hole, if we look at our VDB here, we can see that it's not really working how we want it to work. That is because our geometry is not a closed geometry. It clearly has a ginormous hole in the middle. In case you have this with models, it sometimes happens in certain places like the eye openings. Sometimes modelers leave those, well, not closed. So in that case, we need to drop another node, which is a polyfill. Polyfill is just Houdini's way to close holes. As you can see, we don't have to worry about the topology because we're just using this to fill our mesh and give the VDB an actual inside. Okay. So if your VDB happens to not look right, please try a polyfill node in front of it and it should work. If it doesn't, leave a comment and I'll try and help out. All right, great. Now we've covered our skin and our VDB. We're not going to be using the VDB, but it is just good to know as a concept. Well, we're not going to be using the VDB in this video. We are going to be using it in the future. It is an important part of grooming. Now let's cover our guide creation, which is the next checkpoint. I like to think of 3 checkpoints: the skin, the guides, and the hairs. And I like to keep those separate because it keeps the graph clean. So let's create our next geometry context. And I like to call this groom because this is going to contain both our guides and our hairs. When we jump in here, first we will notice that our sphere is now ghosted out, which I don't like. So I like to come up to here and change it from ghost other objects to show all objects. We're also not looking at our mesh right now So let's quickly jump out, go to our skin context, and we have two options. We can either just visualize the skin here, or a more optimized version is we drop an output node here. In this way, Houdini knows what to output to, like let's say we jump out of this context and we visualize our VDB again. If we jump out, it will automatically use whatever is plugged into this output node. So we don't have to worry about what we visualize here. It is a good practice to do, but you can also just visualize the skin node. I also like to turn our viewport from display smooth shaded to smooth wire shaded, just so I see the wireframe. Okay, now we can worry about our guides. So in our groom context, obviously first we need to drop another object merge. This time we're not getting the geometry, but we're actually getting our skin. So let's grab our skin. We can name this in skin. Here we're going to drop our first important node that we're going to be working with, which is the guide groom node. The guide groom node is going to be your most reliable tool for creating guides. There are other ways, but again, we're going to cover those in future videos. For now, and for your homework, please be sure to go through some of the parameters here. And if you want to, you can always click this question mark icon on the top right here, which will take you straight to the side effects documentation for this specific node. And there's a lot of information here about everything, so I don't need to cover it, it is right there. We will cover it in the future when we do a deep dive on guides, but for now, what you will need to do is, for our tools, the most important ones you're going to be using is the draw tool, which pretty much just draws a guide. Let's visualize this. We can see we can draw guides by hand. The next one is going to be the plant tool, which just plants guides. We're going to be using that in a second, so let's skip over this. We have the sculpt tool, the brush tool, and things like adjust length. Those are probably the most common ones to use. Let's use the plant tool real quick. And if we go to brush options here, we can see the mode is on scatter. We want to put it on single so that wherever we click, we're going to make a guide. And I also like to increase the segment count to something like 15. And let's quickly place a guide here. And we can see, man, that is a tiny guide. That is because our default length currently is 0.01, which is tiny for our scene scale. So let's increase it to like 0.2. Okay, let's increase it to like 0.5. And that's a good length. Now, one thing I do want to mention, because we're working in a geometry context, our curves currently don't have any thickness. You can test this by going into your guide groom, going to width, and then we have this width parameter here. And no matter how much we increase or decrease it, the width of our curve is not going to change. So if we want to have width for our curves, which I recommend, we should head out of our context here, go to this geometry node, and if we go to the miscellaneous tab, we can toggle on shade open curves in viewport. Now, when we do this, we can see it became thinner. So obviously we need to increase the width a bit to make them more easily visible. Another thing to make them more easily visible, this background is horrible for grooming. So let's also hit D in the viewport, go to background, and change the color scheme to dark. All right. One more thing that you might want to consider, if we jump out of our groom context into our skin, we can drop a color node here, which ignore that mine is turquoise and circular. That is just, I changed the setting. So if we go to our color node here, we can just pick like maybe like a dark brown, and that way we will now very clearly see our guides. For our guides, we want to focus on even coverage. We don't need a ton of guides. We just want them to be spaced relatively evenly. So I'm just going to drop a couple guides, have them space relatively evenly, just go around in a circle, and this is going to be a glorious ugly sphere. Also, I'm going to turn the grid off here, just because we're not concerned with that. We place somewhere here. And you can see, I would say this is, it kind of looks like a mine, but you can see it's fairly evenly covered. Now, if we go up to the top again, we can now use the sculpt tool, and we can brush our guides. Perfect. Now it no longer looks like a mine. And let's say we only want to brush one guide. We can hit S in the viewport, do a selection, hit S again, we can see in this group parameter, we've selected primitive number 5. And now no matter what we do down here, we will only change this guide. If we want to unselect them, we can just come here, delete the number 5, and now we're back to doing our operation to all the guides. I would say this is a decent number, and I think it's going to be fine for demonstration purposes. So let's drop another null and call this out guides. Great. Now we've kind of covered guide generation, which for your homework, just make a sphere like this, give it some guides, brush the guides, and check what other options you can do. Just gain some experience with the tools. Great. Now for our next step, since we were talking about creating both our guides and our hairs in this context, we are going to object merge this out guides node, which I don't want to disconnect. I just want to drag it into this object slot up here, or you can also go to here and select it manually, but I like to do it this way. And I'm also going to copy our skin, drop it down here, and move this a little bit down just to separate our guide creation from what is now going to be our hairgen. So we can drop a hairgen node, which I have colored red for myself, and we can plug in our skin and our guides. Now when we look at this, it might not be what you expect, but I will explain exactly what we're looking at. In the hairgen, we have a bunch of parameters. Even in this, we have a thickness attribute where we can change the width. We also have this density here that will spawn more or less hairs. We have a scatter seed. We have relax iterations, which just spaces the hairs more evenly or less evenly, and a bunch of other parameters. We're going to go over a couple just to have it covered. Please be sure to mess with the parameters yourself a little bit as well. So the most important ones that we're going to cover are influence radius, maximum guide count, and also this section down here about the unguided hairs. As you might notice, some hairs are just growing straight out of the skin. Those are called unguided hairs, which usually we don't want at all, because we want every single hair to be shaped by a guide. So I will just recommend for you to turn off grow unguided hairs completely. That way we're not growing any that will look off. Now that we have that turned off, we can also very clearly see what the influence radius does. Because on all of these little spots of hairs, we can see that is exactly where our guides are placed. Influence radius is pretty much a radius around our guides where that guide will influence the hair. And if you turn off unguided hairs, it will also only grow hairs in that area. So if we increase this, we can see the radius grows bigger. Now, because of our scene scale, we might have to punch this up to 1 to cover the whole sphere, which looks a little bit blocky, but let's do 0.5, okay. And here's where the second parameter, the maximum guide count, comes in, because if we turn this up to 1, it kind of smooths out everything that we did with our guides, which we might not want. If one hair is inside the influence radius of multiple guides, it will kind of blend in between those guides. Currently we have our maximum guide count set to 10. That means one hair has a maximum of 10 guides that it can be influenced by, which means it might blend between 10 guides, which obviously will smooth out the result a lot. So if we lower the guide count here, we can see that it is changing the shape quite drastically, which currently we don't want this look, but because we have such little guides and our maximum guide count is set to 1, we're getting this very choppy look. If we turn it to 2, it will be a little smoother, but I would recommend probably to place some more guides around. I'm not going to do that for this demonstration, but you can see what the influence radius does. If you want a general smooth result, then you can keep the maximum guide count pretty high, but 2, 3, 4 is kind of a good range. Sometimes even 1, but anyways, just mess with it, you'll get a feel for it. And that's kind of it about the hair gen. We have generated some hairs. This is let's make it a little bit more of an ugly sphere. Let's lower the guide count. I like this, because this really looks like I don't know what I'm doing. So let's drop a null node at the end, name this out hair. And you can be very proud of yourself, because we just created our first groom. It is definitely not portfolio ready, It might need like 5 to 10 more minutes of work to be there, but we're not going to go there right now. We're just going to be happy that we gained some experience with the tools. Okay, now that we know the basic setup, which is set up our skin, set up our guides, set up our hairs, obviously grooming is not a linear process. Grooming is a lot about doing adjustments to things upstream, meaning this is the power of Houdini. If we start changing our guides, it will automatically update our hairgen. So let's demonstrate that for 1 second. If I were to sculpt all of these like outwards like this, we can see our hairgen will immediately update that. Let's cover another thing. So we just saw that our guides directly influence how our hairs look. So let's also quickly cover, if we go to our skin here, how would we, for example, be able to give him a bald spot? So if we drop an attribute paint node in here, and we will have trouble seeing what we're actually painting. So let's go out of here and turn off the visibility on our groom. Now jump back in here, visualize our attribute paint, and let's also give this attribute a different name, from mask to I like no hair. So let's actually try and paint our no hair attribute. In this attribute paint node, we have another bunch of parameters. This is probably going to be the most important node for your skin generation, because this is how you actually provide attributes to the skin. Be sure to also mess with parameters here. But for now, let's just paint this no hair attribute. When we try and paint this, we can see that it is only painting on the points. It is not painting in between the points or like on the faces. So that should give us the information that painting attributes on the skin is dependent on the resolution of the mesh, which will be a problem for us in this case, because we do not have enough resolution on this sphere at the moment to actually paint a good map. What we would probably need to do is drop a subdivide node, visualize it, also update our VDB input to this node, and then let's say this is still not enough. Let's subdivide it again, maybe even again, just for demonstration. I mean, this is still not a dense mesh, so it's fine to do. And you might be thinking, great, everything is updated. Now my attribute is going to be more detailed. But if we actually look at our attribute paint, we can see that it has created a whole mess. And this is not a usable attribute. 2 workarounds for this. One is when we actually make our skin, we probably should have estimated, like if we import our skin and it looks like this, you can probably guess that this is not going to be high resolution enough. So before you paint any masks, just be sure to drop a subdivide node and subdivide it to a level where you know that you can paint attributes as detailed as you will need. Don't go too high, but go to a decent level. Another scenario, when you have already painted an attribute like we have, and then you need to subdivide it further, there is a workaround for this. It is not perfect, but if you go to recache and then change the recache method to resend rays, it will kind of redo the strokes that you did, but it will not be perfect. So if I go to recache strokes, we can see that this does not entirely look like the mask that I was painting before. So this does require manual cleanup a lot of the time, but at least the mess is gone. Let's paint a little bit more of the attribute. And now, because we're painting a value of 1 here and a value of 0 here, let's see how we can actually give our hairgen this information so it knows where to put hair and where to not put hair. So if we go to our groom context, go back to our groom geometry context, inside our hairgen here, we can go up to the top, go to the density here. We can see it has an override. Very interesting. Let's see what we can do here. When we click, we can see we can plug in a skin attribute. All right, perfect. And if we plug this in, it automatically has a density name for the attribute. But if we click on this drop down, we can select no hair. And we can see it changed immediately. And now we can see that it's only putting hairs where we have a value above 0. It is not limited to areas where we have a value of 1, because all this attribute does is it multiplies whatever value you have in this density parameter, meaning that if we paint, for example, let's go back and paint a value of 0.1 over here, and we go back to our hairgen, we can see that it is dividing this density number by 10, and growing that amount of hair on this part of the sphere. All right, and that's going to be our little setup done. I want you guys to experiment with the parameters you have in this hairgen, in this guide groom, and also in this attribute paint node. You probably won't be able to make something super interesting just with those three, but this is more about understanding that these tools exist and gaining some experience with them. So we're not trying to make something pretty, we're trying to learn. So the way we learn is by spending time with the tools. These tools are going to be used in every groom that you're going to be working on, so it's good to understand them and have some experience. We're going to cover more of the hair gen and what options we have to actually guide hairs and shape them in ways that we want them in the next video, so be sure to check that out when it drops. And if you have any questions, let me know, drop them in the comments, and I'm happy to get back to you. Thank you so much. I hope there's people out there who will find this useful, and leave me feedback about the style of video, maybe things you want to see in future videos, also in the comments. Alright, thank you so much, and enjoy your homework.